All right, what we have here is a word problem that is going to involve 5 different parts. And we're going to start with part A. And the word problem reads that Mario and Grace are each saving money. Mario starts with $80 in his savings account and adds $10 per week. Grace starts with $20 in her savings account and adds $30 each week. And what we have to do for part A is write an equation in y equals mx plus b form to represent at what rate Mario and Grace are saving their money. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I am going to write Mario right here, and right beneath his name, I'm going to set up an equation that represents his situation and do the same thing for Grace over on this side. Now, y equals mx plus b has 4 distinct pieces. Now, the m is what we call our slope. And slope really just is a rate. And we must remember that a rate is the relationship between 2 different units. In this case, what we're doing is we are comparing money compared to time. Mario and Grace are both saving a certain amount of money over a certain amount of time. So when we're setting up our equation, anything that indicates a rate, we should substitute m with that rate. Now, b is the y-intercept. This means where does our line cross the y-axis? Now, another way we can think about the y-intercept is where would x be equal to 0? So if we know what x represents in the problem, for example, in this problem, x is going to represent the number of weeks. So we would ask ourselves the question at 0 weeks, how much money would Mario have? Now, the x is going to represent one variable in the relationship, and the y is going to represent the other variable in your relationship. Now, remember, slope looks at the relationship between both variables, but x is only one of those 2 variables, and y is the other. X is our input, and y is our output. So in this example, if we were to put into the equation how many weeks Mario is saving, and then multiply it by the rate he is saving per week, and then add it to how much he has, if anything, to start with, that will give us an output, which is y. So in this case, y is going to represent the total amount of money that is saved by Mario, and x is going to equal the number of weeks Mario is saving. And that will also be true for Grace as well. So let's just go ahead and write our equation over here. All right, so right away in the problem, it says that Mario starts with $80 in his savings account. That means before he even starts adding $10 per week, at 0 weeks, Mario has $80. And so with that language, we can see that 80 must be substituted for our y-intercept, which is represented by b. So I'm going to change this plus b into plus 80. Now, the problem also indicates that Mario is saving $10 per week. And the language that they use there sounds exactly like a rate. That is why 10 is the slope of this equation here. So we are going to go ahead and substitute m with 10 and multiply that by x. Now, we should understand that even though 10 is just a single number here, slope really is a relationship between 2 variables. So really, there's always a 1 underneath a whole number there. So what we're saying here is that Mario is saving $10 for each week. But we write things in simplest form in math. That's why in our equation, we only write 10. Now, x represents the number of weeks that Mario is saving. So if we wanted to plug in 2 weeks into x, we would multiply 2 by that $10 to get 20 and then add 80 and say that y would be equal to $100 in his savings account. Now, the problem indicates that Grace starts with $20 in her savings account. And so we're going to substitute b, which is how much you start with positive 20. And the rate at which she is saving money is $30 each week. So we're going to substitute m, which is slope, with 30. So the equation for Grace is y equals 30x plus 20. All right, now what each of these equations allows us to do is plug in any number of weeks in for X, multiply by the rate at which that individual is saving, and add it to how much they already had in their savings account to get the total amount of money that each person has in their savings account. So X is our input, which is the number of weeks. And when we solve everything over here on the right side, it will give us our output, which is how much money in total that individual has in their savings account. All right, let's go on to part B. All right, now up here, this is just the same information as before. We just have to look at part B here. And it says, using the information given, complete the tables for Mario and Grace. Now remember, Mario started with $80 before he even started saving more money. So we would say at 0 weeks, Mario has $80 already. And then every week thereafter, he is saving $10 per week. So 1 week later, we have to add $10 to 80, which would be 90. The second week, you would add another $10, which would be 100. Another week later, that's 110. 4 weeks later, 120. 5 weeks later, 130, which is already in the table. And 6 weeks later, that would be $140. And for Grace, at 0 weeks, she already has $20 in her savings account. So Grace is starting out with 20. Now, because the next number is 50, all right, that means that there's an increase in $30. And it does say that Grace is adding $30 each week. So that means this must be 1 or 1 week later. So 1 week later, Grace adds $30 more to her savings account. A second week later, we have to add another 30, which is 80. Another $30 would be 110, so this must be 3 weeks later. A fourth week later, we would have, or Grace would have, 140, and then 170, and then 200. Now remember, the equation that represents Mario's situation is y equals 10x plus 80, and Grace's equation is y equals 30x plus 20. And what we can do with those equations that we did in part A is we could take any one of these x's, which are the inputs, and put them into our equation, and we should get the correct output. So for example, let's just take 4 weeks. If we substitute x here with 4, that would be 10 times 4, which is 40, and 40 plus 80 more is 120, which is what we have in this column right here, 120. All right, let's go on to part C. Okay, for part C, what we have to do is we have to graph the system of equations, which just means the two equations that represent Mario and Grace's savings on this graph right here. Now, remember Mario's situation, or equation, I should say, is y equals 10x plus 80, and Grace's equation is y equals 30x plus 20. All right, so if you have your equation in y equals mx plus b form, start with your y-intercept, because we know that there is going to be a point located at that value. So let's find positive 80 on the y-axis, which is right here. So basically what we're saying is for Mario at 0 weeks, if I put that as a point, that would be 0, he would have $80 in the bank. Now, from that point, we can take advantage of the slope, which is right in front of the x. Now, remember, if you have a single number here, just put a 1 on the bottom so you understand that you would go up 10 units and over 1. In this case, it would be up $10 and over 1 week. So from this point here, we're going to go from $80 to $90, and then we're going to go over 1 week. Now we have to be careful here. We don't want to go over just one box here, because if we note on the x-axis, one box is only half of a week. So we go up $10 and over 1 week, which would be right here. And the same thing again, up $10 over a week, up 10 over a week, up 10 over a week, up 10 over a week. And when you have enough points that will allow you to make a straight line, you can go ahead and just create your line. And now I'm simply going to connect my points together to create a line that represents the relationship. Now, the equation for Grace has a y-intercept at 20. That means before Grace even started saving, she already has $20 in her account. So this point right here is 0 weeks. She has $20. Now from there, we're going to create more points by looking at the slope or the rate at which she is saving. And she is saving $30 each week. So from here, we're going to go up 30, which would be 10, 20, 30, and over 1 week and make a new point. Same thing, we go up 10, 20, 30 more dollars over 1 week. We go up 10, 20, $30 and over a week. And notice that point we just made is directly on the other line. All right, let's create a couple more points. So we're going to go up 10, 20, 30 and over a week. 10, 20, 30 and over a week. And that should be good enough. And then we are going to connect our points to create the line that represents this relationship for Grace. Now, let's take a look at the point at which these two lines intersect. We would say that these two lines intersect at the point 3 and 110. Now, what that really means there is that at 3 weeks, Grace and Mario would both have $110. So one thing that we should notice right away is, although Mario started out with more money and Grace started out with less, Grace's line is steeper. It has a higher slope, which means at some point she was going to pass up Mario. And Mario is saving less than Grace is, so his slope is more shallow and not as steep as Grace's line here. And it is at this point where they have the same amount of money, which is in the 3rd week. So one way that you might hear this quite frequently is that 310 is the solution for the entire system of equations. Or we could say that this point right here would make both of these equations true if we were to put the 3 in for the x and the 110 in for y. All right, let's go on to part D. All right, for part D, we have to determine, after 5 weeks, who has more money in their savings account. Explain your reasoning. You must use either equations, tables, or a graph to support your answer. Now, we already created the equations for those two situations. We already filled out a table, and we have a graph from the previous problems. So we just have to use one of those 3 to figure out after 5 weeks who has more money in their savings account. Now it's saying we can use either one of these 3, but I'm just going to go through each one of these. So let's start by using equations. Now remember, for Mario, the equation is y equals 10x plus 80. And for Grace, the equation is y equals 30x plus 20. So if I want to figure out who has more money after 5 weeks, all we have to do is substitute x with 5. So let's do that for Mario to start. And let's label this Mario so we don't get the people confused. So y equals 10 times 5 plus 80. All right, now 10 times 5 is 50, and 50 plus 80 is 130. So after 5 weeks, Mario has $130. And for Grace, if we multiply $30 per week by 5 weeks and then add 20, that would give Grace a savings of $150 plus 20 which is equal to $170. So we would say after 5 weeks, Grace has more money. All right, let's use the tables that we created in part B to support our answer. Okay, so these are the tables that we completed in part B, and all we have to do is go to the 5th week in each one of our tables and do a comparison. And we can clearly see at the 5th week that Mario has $130 and Grace has $170. So we can make a statement saying something like, at the 5th week, we can see by looking at our table that Grace has $40 more than Mario does. All right, now let's use the graph that we created in part C to support our answer. All right, to compare to see who has more money using the graph after 5 weeks, the first thing we have to do is make sure we know what line represents which individual. And this line right here represents Mario. So let me just label this line Mario. And this line right here represents Grace. Because remember, Grace started with $20 in her account at 0 weeks, and Mario started with $80 at 0 weeks in his account. So what we're going to do is go to the 5th week on the x-axis and raise up until we hit Mario's line, and go over to the y-axis and see that he has $130 at the 5th week. And for Grace at the 5th week, if we go up and hit her line and go over to the y-axis, we can see that she has $170 at that point in time. So to explain our reasoning, we could say something like this. We could say something like, if you locate 5 on the x-axis and then you go straight up and see what the y value is for each one of the relationships or lines that represent Mario and Grace, we can see that Mario has $130 at that point in time, and Grace has $170 at that time, which is $40 more than Mario. All right, we have one more part, which is part E. All right, for part E, we have to determine at how many weeks will Mario and Grace have the same amount in their savings account. And we have to determine how much will they each have. And we have to explain our reasoning using equations or tables or a graph. So basically, we're doing the same thing that we did in part D, with the exception that we want to make sure that they have the same amount of money. Remember, in part D, Grace had more money after 5 weeks, but now we want to see at how many weeks will they have the same amount of money. All right, let's start by finding out using equations. So the equation for Mario is y equals 10x plus 80. And for Grace, the equation is y equals 30x plus 20. All right, now when you have two equations, what you can do is you can take everything after the equal sign. As long as the equations are written in y equals mx plus b form, you can take everything after the equation and just write it by itself. So I'm just going to write the expression 10x plus 80 and do the same thing for the other equation, 30x plus 20, and set those two expressions equal to each other. And that allows us to find what x value would work for both equations simultaneously. So now that we did that, what I'm going to do is I am going to actually take this 10x and I'm going to move it over to the other side, only because that's going to keep everything positive. Because if I were to take 30x and make it negative, I'd have negative 30x and positive 10x, which you can still do and get the right answer, but there's less chance for you to make a mistake with the signs. So like I said, I'm going to take this 10x and move it to the other side. And that means that I'm going to take this 30x over here. I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to subtract 10x, which is the opposite. All right, so I moved this term. And I'm going to keep my constants over on the left. So I'm going to keep my constant of 80 over here on the left. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 20 and do the opposite. which is subtract 20. So I'm going to write minus 20 over here. All right, now negative 20 plus 80 is the same thing as 80 minus 20, which is 60. And on the right-hand side, we have 30x take away 10x, which is 20x. And now this is essentially mental math, because the only thing x could be when multiplied by 20 to get 60 would be 3. So we can just make an ending statement that x is equal to 3. So that means at 3 weeks, they would have the same amount of money. Now to figure out how much money that would be, we could take either one of our equations. I'll just take Mario's equation and substitute x, which represents a number of weeks, with 3. So we're going to do $10 a week times 3 weeks plus that $80 that he started with. And that would give us, at this point, $30 plus 80, which is a grand total of $110. So what we would say is, after 3 weeks, both Grace and Mario would have $110. All right, let's go ahead and use the tables to see when they would have the same amount of money. Okay, now if we go back to part B, when we completed our tables, we can see at the 3rd week, Mario had a savings of $110, as did Grace. So we could easily go back to our table and see that they have the same amount of money after the 3rd week. So when explaining your reasoning, you could say something like, if you look at the X column and go to 3 weeks, you can see that they have the same amount of money in the Y column, or their savings, at that 3rd week. All right, let's go ahead and use the graph to explain our answer, although we kind of already did that, but let's just rehash what we already talked about. All right, now when looking back at our graph, remember at the point at which our 2 lines intersected each other, it is that point where you would have the same X and the same Y, or in this case, the same number of weeks for each individual and the same amount of savings for each individual. All right, so when you explain your reasoning using the graph, you could say something to the effect like, when you graph 2 relationships, the point where the 2 intersect each other will have the same X and the same Y value. And because these 2 lines intersect at the 3rd week with a Y value of 110, we know that they will both have $110 at the 3rd week.
Hey, I just want to say thanks for checking out this math tutorial. Please don't forget to hit that subscription button and activate notifications so you can be informed as I upload new math tutorials that just might help you with your math homework. Until next time, this is Shane Masonette with Masonette Math.